You probably are familiar with making tote bags from upcycled feed bags. Well, this video is to show you an alternative by using tarps to make those totes instead. Now, the actual sewing of the tote bag isn't too different from the feed bags, but the hardest part of this project will be finding a spot sufficient enough to lay out and handle the tarp. I laid out my first tarp on my garage floor, but the second one was easily done in my sewing room on my craft table. So if you're still with me and feeling adventurous, let's go make one. You will need for this project a tarp, rigid ruler, scissors, clips, tape measure, felt tip marker, and optional rotary cutter and mat. Now the tarp will dull scissors due to the woven threads in it, so don't use your best sewing shears. And don't use pins as they leave a hole in the tarp. Use clips instead. The tarp I'm using came from Harbor Freight. It's 7 foot 4 inches by 9 foot 6 inches and costs $6.29. And I got 6 totes from it at a cost of about $1.05 per bag. There are many sizes of tarps, but this size I felt I could handle without it becoming too unruly. Look for one made from a polyethylene material with woven fibers in it. The fibers make it tear resistant, and it'll hold up better and be less likely to not rip from the holes you're putting in it from stitching. The thickness of my tarp is 5 mil, which they call an all-purpose weight. There's no need to go thicker, but don't go too much thinner as it may not stand up as well. The first thing that I did was cut off the outer cording and discarded it. I then measured in 3 inches from the raw edges and trimmed this off and set aside so I could make the handles out of it. It helps if you use clips to hold the layers of the tarp in place as you cut. And oh, I finally found a use for those pink craft clamps I bought at the Dollar Tree store. I then cut the 3-inch wide strips into 24-inch long sections for the straps, cutting out between the grommets. I was able to get 12 sections, which is enough for the handles for 6 totes. Next, I did a measurement of the usable area I had left, which was about 80 inches wide by 107 long. I wanted my cut pieces for the bags to be 22 inches high by 44 inches wide, so there would only be one side seam. And after doing some calculations, I found I could easily get 6 bags for my tarp with some strips left over. I was happy with that, and yours may be different depending on what you're working with. Now spread out your tarp on your cutting surface and measure out the pieces. I found I could measure 44 inches wide, then cut down about 1 foot, then fold the leading edge down, and using that as a guide, I kept cutting 44 inches wide down the length of the tarp. Now your cuts may be a little crooked, but don't worry about that. If yours is a rough cut, straighten it out and trim it up later before sewing the tote. After you have one bag cut out, use that as a pattern for the rest of the cuts. All right, now the worst part is done. Now we can sew. Prepare your machine by using a size 90/14 universal needle and good quality polyester thread. There's no need to use heavy-duty thread. Test your machine on scraps of the tarp. If you plan on sewing the seams with a zigzag stitch, lengthen the stitch and the width to 4.0. If you are sewing the seams with a straight stitch, use a 3.5 to a 4.0 length and double stitch the seams about a 1/4 inch apart. If you find that you're having trouble sewing on the tarp, you can use a walking foot or switch to a Teflon coated foot. You can also fold bias tape over the seam and stitch through all the layers, which makes for a very sturdy seam. And if you have tissue paper or stitch and tear, you can sew the seam over it and then tear it off. Now my machine did just fine sewing the tarp with both the standard presser foot and the Teflon foot. Now let's start by preparing the straps. Take one of the 3-inch by 24-inch sections and fold it into thirds lengthwise. You can finger press it down, or you can roll it with a seam roller. Once you've got the first side folded in, fold the other side in and press that down too. You can even run the edge of a ruler or a hard edge over it to flatten it down, but obviously don't iron it. Now you should have a finished width of about 1 inch when you're done. Now it's time to zigzag or top stitch along both edges, but make sure that you're going to catch the cut edge from the last fold that was on top. Now is the time to straighten the bag fabric if you need to. This can easily be done with a rotary cutter and straight edge on your cutting mat. With right sides together, sew the side seam and then the bottom shut using about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. To make the bag stand up, we will box the bottom corners by putting in a gusset. With the bag still right sides together, put your hand in the corner and spread it out so the bottom seam lines up with the side seam and it comes to a point. Clip this in place and place it flat on the table. Now measure in from the point 3.5 inches up either side and make a mark with a marker. Then draw a line with a straight edge between the two marks, and the line should be parallel to the point. Stitch on this line securely, back tacking at both the beginning and the end, and then when you're done, you go ahead and trim off the point. Now repeat this for the other side. Still with the right sides together, mark the top of the bag 2 inches down from the cut edge all the way around with a marker. Then fold the raw edge to match this mark and clip. Then make one more fold over so the cut edge is enclosed and clip again. This is your top hem. Flatten the bag and with a ruler measure 6 inches in from each side and mark both spots with a clip for the placement of the handles. Repeat for the other side of the tote. Now take one handle, insert it inside this hem allowance at the mark with the right side of the strap facing you. Clip it in place. Straighten the strap so it's not twisted and insert the other end of the strap under the other clip, and then repeat for the other side of the tote. Stitch this hem allowance down, making sure to catch the strap in your stitching and adjust it so it's straight when you stitch it in the hem. Go all the way around the bag, back tacking at the beginning and end. Now move your presser foot to the top of the fold, about 1/4 inch away from the edge, and top stitch around the hem a second time. Now turn the bag right side out and pull the handles straight up and clip. Stitch the handles down to the top by using a box pattern, which is a square or a rectangle with an X in it. Ta-da! You're done! My finished bag measured about 21 inches wide by 17 tall with a 5-inch gusset. Perfect for holding lots of things. Now thank you for watching and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you so much for sewing with Crafting Change.